Welcome. Hello, my name is Kevin Harrington, and I am the co-chair of the Trust and Estates section. Welcome to our program, Governance Structures for Multi-Generational Planning. Before we begin, we have a few housekeeping announcements. You will receive your MCLE certificate shortly after the program. Your certificate will also be stored in the Beverly Hills Bar Association Plus, our members-only community. Please take a moment to complete the survey that is included with your certificate. Our next program will be on May 17th, and it'll be by Scott Ron and Nicholas Van Burnt, who will be providing us with the annual litigation update for trust, probate, and conservatorships. We also have a few words from our sponsors. I would like to introduce Nancy Sanborn and Brian Joy of the Sanborn team.
Thank you, Kevin. Happy holidays for everyone that's had all sorts of good celebrations going on. I just want to say that in these times of uncertainty and times of success, we appreciate the support of the members of the Beverly Hills Bar, but we just want to share a little information with you.
As we've mentioned over the years, we cannot stress enough the importance of obtaining and reviewing a preliminary title report, not just a property profile. Here are a few examples that has happened to us recently. A property was deeded by a successor trustee to a beneficiary. Although the property profile showed the beneficiary on title, the title company's prelim did not reflect the transfer. It was necessary to provide the title company with a copy of the trust to ensure that the beneficiary had the right to sell the house. In another case, we had a notice of pending action from 1983, which was a cloud on title and needed to be cleared prior to closing. This particular property is located in Kern County. California Title, who is a sponsor of this bar, helped to remove this item from the prelim. Lastly, a disgruntled beneficiary who had been evicted from the subject property filed a homestead. Again, the title company had to remove it.
These are just some recent examples that we've had just since this year. Over the years, we have dealt with bail bonds, deeds of trust, etc. You never know what you find, and the earlier you find it, the easier it is to deal with it. In all of these cases we're recently talking about, none of these were reflected in a property profile. So as a matter of practice, whenever we're alerted that we're going to be involved with selling a property, we always order a property profile a preliminary title report immediately so that we can see what might be affecting the title. Again, just as you have supported us, we are happy to continue our support of the Beverly Hills Bar and specifically the Trust and Estates section. Have a great meeting. Back to you, Kevin.
Thanks, Nancy and Brian. We also have a few words from Orit Gadish of Geffen Real Estate.
Thanks, Kevin. Hi, everyone. I'm Orit Gadish, broker and owner of Geffen Real Estate. We specialize in representing trustees, administrators, executors in the sale of commercial and residential real estate. We're focused on adding value for our clients, whether it's a partial or complete renovation. We first conduct our due diligence to determine the most appropriate value add solution, and then we execute with no cost to the seller until escrow is closed. We also have a designer on our team to ensure the properties we're selling are appealing to buyers and are drawing on their emotions to allow for top offer prices. We're not a cookie cutter renovator. I'd love to connect with you to get to know you. Please feel free to call or text me anytime. It's in the chat box. Enjoy your program, and back to you, Kevin.
Thank you, Orit. In addition to the Sanborn team and Geffen Real Estate, the Trust and Estates section is also sponsored by Glen Oaks Escrow. Marcine Klein is a full-service escrow officer specializing in probate, trust sales, conservatorship, and both court and independent administration of Estates Act transactions. On a daily basis, Marcine works to ensure that even the most challenging escrows close smoothly and that our clients are beyond happy with their experience at Glen Oaks Escrow. We're all sponsored by California Title Company. California Title Company provides comprehensive and timely insurance protection for home buyers, including first-time home buyers, sellers, veterans and military personnel, seniors, real estate agents, and brokers. mortgage lenders, and commercial real estate professionals. Lastly, we have Manufacturers Bank. Simplify your banking. Let Manufacturers Bank do it for you. Manufacturers Bank has a dedicated trust and estate banking team with the experience to handle all your banking needs. Contact Brian Flores, Vice President and Senior Relationship Manager, for more information. I will now turn our program over to Jacqueline Yu for the legal updates.
Thank you so much, Kevin. For today's legal updates, we have two cases. Our first case is Balistreri versus Balistreri, heard in the First Appellate District, Division 3. Here, the decedent's spouse, Mary Balistreri, filed a petition in probate court alleging that the day before her husband, Sal Balistreri, died, they amended their revocable trust. Their revocable trust provided for a method of modification stating, any amendment, revocation, or termination shall be made by a written instrument signed with signature acknowledged by a notary public. The day before Sal died, Mary and Sal signed their amendment to the trust, but their signatures to the amendment were not notarized. Mary filed a petition to confirm the validity of the amendment, arguing that the amendment satisfied the available statutory method for trust modification under Probate Code Section 15402. However, the decedent's son and Mary's stepson opposed the petition, arguing that the amendment was invalid on grounds that the amendment failed to comply with the trust's express method for modification, which required a notarization. The probate court held the amendment was invalid for lack of notarization. Agreeing with the probate court, the appellate court held the trust amendment was also invalid. It reasoned that when, as here, a trust instrument specifies how the trust is to be modified, that method must be used to amend the trust, regardless of whether the method of amendment is exclusive or permissive, and regardless of whether the trust provides for identical or different methods of amendment and revocation. Now, for our second case, it's United States versus Allison, heard in Federal District Court in the Eastern District of California. The court considered two disputed adjustments to the estate tax and whether the personal representatives of the estate were personally liable for the unpaid estate taxes assessed from these adjustments. The decedent, Roger Wilson, died on November 27, 2005. Approximately 2 weeks before his death, Roger created a revocable trust naming the defendants as co-trustees. Following his death, the defendants were appointed as personal representative of Roger's estate. On February 27, 2007, the defendants timely filed a federal estate tax return for Roger's estate and paid the estate taxes due. At that time, they had already fully distributed the assets of the estate. 3 years later, the IRS assessed the estate additional federal estate taxes with penalties and interest, to which the defendants, acting as the estate's personal representatives, executed a waiver of restriction on assessments, agreeing to all but 3 of the adjustments made by the IRS. 2 of the disputed adjustments were placed at issue by the IRS's motion for summary judgment. The first is the inclusion in the decedent's gross estate of a $35,000 check that was issued by the decedent as a gift, and the second was a disallowance of a $25,000 deduction from the gross estate of a settlement payment paid by the estate. With regard to the first disputed adjustment, the IRS argued that the $35,000 check was includable in Roger's estate because the recipient of the check refused to accept the check before Roger's death. Following his death, the estate even canceled and reissued the check, showing that the check had never been delivered or accepted initially. The court ruled in favor of the IRS's motion for summary judgment, reasoning that the gift was incomplete and the $35,000 funds were includable in the decedent's estate. The second disputed adjustment involved a $25,000 settlement payment that was ultimately paid to Roger's daughter in response to her claim to a portion of his estate as her inheritance. The estate sought to deduct the settlement payment on the decedent's estate tax return pursuant to Internal Revenue Code Section 2053. However, case law has established that a beneficiary's claim to a portion of the estate as an inheritance is not deductible. The IRS requires that the claimant be a creditor whose claim is against the estate as a whole. The court ruled in favor of the IRS's motion for summary judgment, confirming the general rule that claims disputing or relating to an inheritance rather than a debt owed by the decedent cannot be deducted from the decedent's gross estate. Given that the estate had no funds with which to pay the additional taxes assessed by the IRS in its audit, the court imposed personal liability on the defendants in their capacity as co-trustees and personal representatives, but only up to the value of property held by the estate and the decedent's trust as of date of death. Now I'd like to hand it over to Dina Nam, our program co-chair, to introduce our speakers.
Thank you, Jacqueline. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Dina, and I'm one of the program co-chairs this year, and I'm happy to introduce two of our speakers for today. Our first speaker is a familiar face, Andrea Kushner. She is a former past co-chair of the Trust and Estates Executive Committee of the Beverly Hills Bar Association. She is a senior vice president and director of the Wealth Strategies Group at Bernstein. Our second speaker today is Mark Powell. He is currently a wealth strategist at AdvicePeriod, a registered investment advisory firm. His past and current experience includes being a former partner at 2 international law firms, as well as an adjunct professor at Chapman University School of Law in their tax program. And he is an active fellow of the American College and Trust and Estate Council. So welcome, Andrea, and welcome, Mark. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Dina. So I'm going to kick it off with a couple of comments and a couple of slides, and then Andy and I are going to go back and forth after that. We want to just give you an overview. I better share my slides first. Let me do that. All right, we had it all set up, and now, how's that?
There you go.
Okay, good, thanks. So this is an overview of the presentation, what we're going to cover today. Two sort of different topics. We're going to start with what is family governance. We're going to cover things like family meetings, mission statements, family councils, so just a whole bunch of different structures that you can use when you're doing family governance. And we're going to start with why would you even do family governance, but just so you can see where we're going. Then the second thing we're going to do is try to, throughout the program, take some real life examples and case studies to highlight bits and pieces of the material, the governance ideas, and things like that. Now, you are invited all along the way to ask questions, post things in chat. One of us will be watching for that, so that if you've got a question, we can take it as it comes instead of the risk of not having any time at the end. So we're just going to keep going. We're going to start with what is family governance. The idea of family governance is that some families, either because their assets are large or complicated, they own a family business, they have some sort of complexity in their lives and in their planning objectives. So family governance is really meant to give an entire family a way to speak with one voice. So you may have 2, 3, 4, 5 generations that are involved with a family estate plan, with a family entity, with an enterprise, something like that. And so the idea of family governance is, how do we give all of those people a way to communicate together, and then to put their energy and their assets and their objectives out into the world. It's really about family communication and coming up with a way to make family decisions. So you can see our slide here has got lots of different things on here. What we really want to get across to you in all of this is all of these techniques are meant to enhance family cohesion, to give people a way who might not normally come together, maybe holidays or some things like that, but to really invite them into a conversation and to give them a structure to participate in what the family's doing. So here are some things that we can talk about. Each family who engages in this is going to have their own model. Just because Andy and I were going to talk about different structures and sort of common things that go along with it, every family is unique. Not every family will use all of these structures. Some will will just need one or just need part of one. You have to make sure that you're meeting the family where they are and you're giving them what they need. But generally, we want to set a vision for the family, and that's the vision can be really hard and the vision can change over time. But as a starting place, we want to come up with a vision of what the family wants to do, how it defines itself compared to other families and other groups out in the world. And we do that really by talking about values. We start with the discussion of family values. And when I say family values, I mean like values, actually things like, do you value independence? Do you value financial freedom? Do you value community? Things that are not, family values has got some connotations, but these are really actually digging in and spending time with family members to see where do their values line up and where are they so lined up that we can build something around that. This kind of statement of values really becomes the family's North Star. We want everything that we do after we start family governance to sort of look at it through this lens and figure out, if we take step X, is that going to get us closer or further from these values? And it becomes a filter for how to decide what's important and what are the things that need to be paid attention to, and what are the things that you can put off or that you can decide to deal with later. There are going to be roles in all of this, and we need to educate the family members about that. And it can be very formal education, which we'll talk about in a bit. It can be much more informal education, where you may have cousins and nieces and nephews, working together, trying to figure things out. But the roles are really important, because we are talking about a family, and there is a family history, and weaving that story together is part of what makes the family a cohesive group. So we absolutely want to do that. We'll talk about, at least for a few minutes, business succession and how you deal with family businesses inside a succession plan, a family governance plan. So the idea of ownership, the idea of succession, whether it's through the business or whether it's much more simply, the trustee succession and the decision-making succession plan, in whatever techniques you're going to put together, they become very important. Because it's a family, we want to make sure that we are celebrating what the family's doing. And a lot of the time when we talk about family meetings and councils and things like that, there's got to be time to talk about the family and what's happening in each family branch, what people are proud of, what people are doing that's new, because that's also part of building that identity as a family. And of course, we want to stay informed and communicate. Communication is really important. I've worked with families, where they send out 300 newsletters. The families are just massive. And so they get lots of newsletters that go out probably at this point once a quarter. But that idea of communication, it helps build the cohesion and build the identity as a family. And one of the biggest things we want to make sure we do is we build in to whatever structures we use a way to resolve conflict or to prevent conflict, because as estate planners, we all know how easy it is for dissension to creep in, how easy it is for feelings to get hurt, how easy it is for decisions that are made today to be based on things that happened 20, 25, 30 years ago. So part of this is creating a way to resolve those feelings, resolve those discussion issues, and make sure that everybody's in a place where we can now move forward. We may not forget all the things that happened in the past, but at least we're at a place where we can keep going. So that was a long first slide. I'm going to give Andy a chance to talk now, because I've been going at it for quite a few minutes.
Thanks, Mark. Well, Mark has talked about, what is family governance. I'm going to spend a minute and talk about why is it important, and really more of the how of it. And actually, Mark, I think you nailed it, really, of why it's so important when At its best, family governance facilitates effective family communication. And I'm putting in the effective in that statement because not all communication is effective communication. So we want positive, collaborative, effective communication. And why do we want that? Well, we've seen that when a family communicates in a healthy way, it reduces the conflict. Because I think that the best plans and the most informed families realize that there's going to be a conflict at some point. It will happen. And the larger the family and the more stuff you've got going on, the more likely that's going to be. So if you anticipate when the conflict occurs, having a process to deal with that, that will likely reduce the disruption that conflict can create. Because I think, as we've all seen as estate planners, there is nothing that can derail a fabulous plan like a family going at it each other and not following the plan, and that serves no one. So how does governance achieve that goal? I think there's several ways, and this is not an exhaustive list, and you're going to see this as Mark and I go through some of the case studies of how it can work in a real life setting. One, though, is just by clearly articulating and documenting the family rules, that removes, or it can remove, misunderstandings from not recalling conversations and decisions, because that's often a source of conflict. I remember something one way, Mark remembers it a different way, and now we're fighting over what we remembered instead of really getting to the core of the issue. So it's not productive. In a lot of these things that we're going to talk about, especially I would say with mission statements and family constitutions, but really any of these structures, it works best when the family does it together. Why is that? It gives the whole family a sense of ownership. And when you've got a sense of ownership of it, you are more inclined to follow that plan if you were part of the team that created that plan. It also, and we're going to touch on this a bit as well, it identifies not the different groups within a family and how those different groups may interact with each other and how they may have different considerations. And that's definitely true. And we'll talk about it in the context of a family business, when you've got some family members that work in the business, some who are owners but don't work in the business, and then you've got, unrelated employees of the business. How do all of those constituencies work together, and how do we think that through? And then finally, I think that this is underrated, but I'm seeing this play out more and more in the last several years, having family governance structures in place, especially for a family business, can actually enhance its value on an exit, because buyers want to see an operational, functional business. And once you can show the work that's been done to create that, it can definitely lead to better outcomes on an exit. So those are just some thoughts, but again, we will flesh all of this out and also talk about others as we go along the way. Mark, I'm going to turn it back over to you to start our talking about our case studies, and I will acknowledge and own from the outset that the messed up ones are largely mine, even though I did not create the structures, but I will just own it from the start. So Mark, back to you.
It's funny, Andy and I've been doing presentations together for so many years that we egg each other on. She doesn't always have bad situations, no. But when we were making these slides, she got the short end of that stick. So let's just talk about how can we actually incorporate family governance principles into an estate plan. And I think one way to really do that is to just start using some examples. So here's one. This is a client that I dealt with a couple of years ago now. Dad was a single guy. He had one daughter, and he came in to see me and he said, I've decided how I want to do my estate plan. And this had been after talking for quite a few months about what he wanted to do. And he said, my estate's $25 million. I'm going to create a donor advised fund. And I'm going to put 75% of my estate into this donor advised fund. And I'm going to take 25% of my estate and put it into a trust for my daughter. His daughter was very, very proactive, very involved in community organizations and in philanthropy and charitable activity. And in his mind, he was doing something tremendous. He was going to put 25% of his shares, 25% of his estate aside in a trust that would throw off an income stream so that she never really had to worry about, about income. She could just go and do the things that she really wanted to do. And he was giving her a pot, 75% of the estate of money to use to further those goals, to increase her ability to get involved with different things and to become, really active in this. And he was very proud of himself, that he'd come up with this. And so when I listened to him and I said, I think we really need to give your daughter a chance to hear this from you. And he was anxious about that because, they hadn't really talked about money. They hadn't really talked about these things, which is part of family governance, is talking about these things. And so I said, let's get her in here. Let's have a meeting and let's talk about this. And he really pushed back on it. And I said, look, I want her to hear it from you because I think there are some risks here. Because leaving 75% of your estate to a donor advised fund, that says something. It may be very charitable of you, but there are other ways it could be interpreted. And he didn't get it until the daughter got into the room and he explained what he was thinking. And although I sort of coached him on some things to say, he threw them out the window like so many of my clients throw out what I tell them to say. But the daughter went berserk. She slammed her hand down on the counter and said, I can't believe you don't trust me. I can't believe that you're going to lock my hands like this. This is just a terrible thing. And within 3 minutes, she'd gotten up and stormed out of the room with a sort of tossing over her shoulder, I'm going to get an attorney and I'm going to undo this. And Dad felt horrible after she left because, he thought he'd come up with something that was really going to be useful and meaningful to her, but he never explained it, never said, these are my objectives, this is why I'm doing this. He just sort of presented it as a done deal. So he said, what do we do? And I said, let's wait, 10 or 15 minutes, because I bet she comes back. And sure enough, she came back in a few minutes. And we ended up having 3 or 4 meetings over 6 to 8 weeks to talk about why this plan felt good to him and to talk about what she could see as being valuable to her in this plan. And even though the plan really didn't change because everybody kind of agreed that it was a good plan in the end, it got off to a really rocky start because we hadn't had those conversations up front. So really simple, just a father and a daughter. This was not a 100-member family. This was not a super complex situation, but it was that lack of communication about real objectives and that lack of discussion about them that really caused us problems. And that's really what family governance is meant to do. So we're gonna go on. I see chat. Okay, I think that's administrative. So let's talk about one of the first tools that we use here. It's a family mission statement. And mission statement sounds, really, it just got a big name, right? And it's got this jargon around it. And so we want to demystify that. There's a quote here from Stephen Covey, a family mission statement is a combined, unified expression, right? All of the people speaking with one voice about what the family is, about what they really want to do, and the principles that they're going to choose to govern themselves by. So family mission can be very complex. I've seen them with 11, 12 different subparts of what their mission is. But then I've also seen some that are really, really simple. Like I'll read a few examples for you that we've worked on. There's not a very complicated one, but create an environment where each of us can find support and encouragement in achieving our life's goals. Then we've got some really simple ones: to love each other, to believe in each other. One family that I can't take advantage, can't take credit for this, but I've read their mission statements, and it says, we live lives of passion. We bring people together. We do the hard work that the world needs. So they can be all sorts of things. And what was that example that do you remember the one that we talked about? last time we did this presentation. Yeah.
My favorite one is actually the one of the TED organization of TED Talks. It's the shortest one I've ever seen. It's 2 words: spread ideas is their mission statement. And I think it's fabulous because it's short, it's elegant, you know what their mission is based on that. So most families I've met with have not been able to cull it down to 2 words, but I agree with you. It doesn't, I think 2 or 3 sentences would be the goal.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's more than enough. And it can be really hard to get 2 or 3 sentences. And as we talk about some of the other structures that might get put into place as part of family governance, there's lots of chance to go into details. So your mission statement's really not that place. But we want to create a shared vision. And we want everybody to feel like they've been able to participate in this, because as Andy said earlier, when you participate in the creation of a statement like this, it's yours. You feel like you're part of it. You feel like you're bonded with the other people who are agreeing to the statement. And it can really go into day-to-day lives. It can become something that parents start to think about when making decisions about kids and what should kids do and what experiences should we make sure our kids have. It can participate and be part of those really small things that aren't part of the larger family, but it can offer ideals like that. The family council that we'll talk about in a bit goes a little bit deeper on this, but you can articulate in your mission statement the standards by which you want to live with each other. Like some of those ones that I read, we bring people together to love each other, to help each other achieve our life's goals. It can be very supportive and very important. Now, it's not written in stone. That's one of the things that is really important is you do this once and it's not done. It's just like your living trust, right? You got to revisit it over time. And so once you get one of these in place, you work with it, you try it, you tweak it. You can tweak it as many times as you want to. You really get to one that works, but just starting is really an important thing. So go to the next one. And I've said just starting is important. Andy's going to give us a little more structure on how to get started.
Well, I would say helping families create family mission statements is one of my favorite things to do. It's a lot of fun. On this page, we kind of go through the process that Bernstein uses a lot. But I think one of the things to remember is that for all of this stuff, not just the mission statement, there's no one right way. There are many ways to approach this. But what we typically do is first help the family convene a family meeting with everybody who's going to participate, because as both Mark and I have said, ownership in the process goes a long way into everyone internalizing this and using it as the family's North Star. So we call that family meeting. And I look at this as going from the general to the specific. In the beginning, we ask a lot of questions about, what kind of family do we want to be? What's important to us? What do we want our legacy to be? And then from there, we kind of cull it down. Well, what is our core set of values, the family values that Mark talked about before? What are the things that resonate and inspire us and why? And then once we cull that down and have that core set of values, then from there, we start drafting and thinking of crafting of those statements in our 2 to 3 sentences. To Mark's point, this is a living statement in that, there's a balance, as there is for all things. We don't want this to be something that a family revisits every 3 months. That's going to be disruptive. But on the other hand, it is something that will grow and likely morph over time as more family members come in, as subsequent generations come up, as there's the addition of spouses, as there's the addition of additional businesses or foundations or, all of the above. It is likely that mission statement will be maybe changed is the wrong word, but refined to encompass all of that. But just as the starting point, just to get the conversation going and talk, I think that's the steps 1 and 2, I think, are the hardest part often. Once you start getting into, okay, what is the juices flowing of what's really important to us and what values do we want to live by, then often the statement emanates from that. So from there, Mark had the good trust example. We're going to keep going through our cases here. And I have the bad trust example. If you want to go to the next slides, Mark. Okay. So this is a case where mom had created an irrevocable trust for her son. Son and mom are co-trustees. Mom and son have a terrible relationship and have always had a terrible relationship. Their terrible relationship predated this trust and, goes back into early childhood. But yet this trust did two things. One, it provided that all decisions had to be made by unanimous trustee consent. It also had no mechanism for dealing with conflict if the trustees didn't agree. So when mom came to us, it actually was a trust that we were, this is one that I've worked on since I've been at Bernstein, where we were managing the investments of the account, and mom came to us in a panic. We've got to file the tax returns for this trust, and I can't get my son to provide me any of the data or do anything. And what am I going to do? We're both. So we referred her out, and it's likely they're in negotiations, but it's likely going to get litigated, which is unfortunate. And so with this one, I often think, well, what measures could have been taken to prevent this undesirable outcome? I think a lot of this could have been done on the front end. Number one, mom never had conversations with her son about why she was creating this trust, what her goals and aspirations for this trust and for him, and what she wanted it to do. And I think that would have been a helpful conversation, because it would have promoted some buy-in from him of, hey, I'm doing this for you. I'm going to make you I'd like you to be the co-trustee with me. And this is why. And this is just having some context, I think would have been helpful. The other thing that was apparent to me is there were some deficiencies in the drafting of this trust. I mean, to have a trust with two trustees where they both have to consent and there's no mechanism for dealing with conflict unless you go to court, not a great plan, especially given their history. So if we agree to the concept that conflict is likely in any family, even ones that are mostly harmonious, it is reasonable to expect that in a family that has not been harmonious, that conflict was going to ensue here, and not planning for that in this document was to their detriment. So that's an area, I think, where the actual drafting of an estate planning document and some of the conversations that we're having today about governments not coincide, but they actually, there's a collision, if you will. And unfortunately, there wasn't with this one. And as a result, the only winners here are going to be the lawyers that are litigating that. And I say that in quotes and kind of tongue in cheek, because at the end of the day, it doesn't feel great to the lawyers either. It's not a result that anybody wants for a client where they're paying a lot of money because of a conflict that could have been avoided in advance. So, Mark, given that, why don't we switch gears? We've been talking about trust and governance. Let's talk about foundations, because a lot of our clients have private foundations. And you've got an example where governance was used in a really healthy way with one.
Yeah, now this one, every time I tell this story, I have to really work hard not to get emotional. So this is the time to pay attention to see if I do. This was one of my very first experiences with the family foundation, and it got it under my blood. And it's been something that I've been doing now for 25 years, working with families and philanthropy. In this particular case, grandparents came to us and said, we want to put $25 million into a foundation. We've got 4 kids. We really hope to get them involved and to, do what a family foundation is supposed to do. They had 4 kids, 11 grandkids. Really they wanted to build something cohesive. So we, did the lawyer work, which was setting it up, getting a tax exempt status and all of that kind of stuff. And then we went a little further in, beyond typical lawyer work, which was helping them figure out how are they going to run this thing. And, as a side note on that, the first few conversations I had with family governance issues with family were really nerve-wracking, because they aren't typical lawyer kind of conversations. And so there's a bravery in, taking that step and sort of diving into it. But once you do it, you just find how much you can get from these clients and how much you can help them. So in this family, we went to the 4 kids. We spent about a year trying to get the 4 kids involved. And what we learned pretty quickly was that the 4 kids were in their 40s. They had families and jobs and very busy people. And they saw this foundation as an extra burden because it was something that their parents expected them to do. And their parents' names were on it, not their names. And so we just had no luck getting the kids involved. So we decided, let's skip and try the grandkids. There were 11 grandkids. It was a tremendously interesting year and a half because some of the grandkids were like 6 and 7 years old, and a couple of them were in college. And the grandparents had one grandchild that they were particularly worried about because he was the only child. And the family lived, that part of the family lived kind of far away, and they were really anxious about how that particular grandson was going to get involved with things. And we created a junior advisory board. We put in a very unique structure, about how the grandkids got involved and what they were going to do. And we did something that was sort of typical for way back then. As we said, everybody's got $1,000. Let's figure out how to give it away. Well, dealing with 6 and 7 year olds and, $1,000 was like, that just made no sense. So we finally, with the younger beneficiaries, boiled it down to how many animals can we feed for $1,000. And the 2 youngest of these cousins, they weren't siblings, they were cousins, just worked miracles because they took their share, and then the next year they put together, and then the next year they started asking other of their cousins, to contribute some of their $1,000. So they're very entrepreneurial. And it really sort of, you watched it spread from this young generation. But I don't want to forget the older grandson because it's a remarkable story. So he decided to put his money toward a Boys and Girls Club type basketball program where the scoreboard wasn't working and hadn't been working. So he said, I want to get this going. Sports were very important to him. They arranged for him to go to meet to the executive director and talk to him. And, it turns out that the scoreboard was going to cost a lot more than $1,000. And so this was a great opportunity for him to go and talk to his grandparents about what was this meant to be and how is this family going to do things and how do we pull together. And of course, the grandparents said, we'll give you the extra money so you can fix the scoreboard. On opening day of the basketball season, grandparents went, parents went, the son went, and the executive director called him down onto the court and just told the story of why they were finally able to start their basketball program again. And so the grandson went down and came back up into the stands, and the grandfather said later that in between when he left this and went down and came back, he was no longer just a grandchild. He was no longer just a member of a wealthy family. He had become a steward of what they were able to do with their family wealth. And last I checked, this group of grandkids who've now got their own kids and involved them have done 37 or 38 inner city playgrounds. And they're like SWAT teams. Some of them know how to do the license, what's it called? You get your licenses to have it, the city. Some of them know how to deal with the playground manufacturers, equipment. Some of them know how to deal with the schools, and they just go. And it's exactly what you'd want out of this. And it all grew out of some good conversation and a junior advisory board that worked on values. So keep going here because I know we've got a short period of time. So let's start with the family meetings are kind of the basis for all of family governance. So we want to tell you a little bit about what usually goes into a family meeting. These are typically very well programmed and thought out meetings. It's not, I think it was Ronald Reagan who said that, all change in America starts at the dining room table. These are much more thought through programs, right? Because they're typically a day or a day and a half or 2 days, sometimes a weekend. everybody who's part of the family who's going to be able to participate in this goes away. You mix some of the business of a family meeting with fun things, activities, to get cousins and nieces and nephews to know each other, and to build that cohesion outside of just a family meeting. But in the family meeting, you want to have all the adults, all the people who can participate. And there's no magic to who that should be. I see people involving kids when they get to be 16 or 17 or maybe 18. Another question that comes up all the time is, what about spouses? And I don't have a magic answer for that. I think it's family by family, deciding, what makes sense and what doesn't make sense for spouses to be there. At least not just at the meeting, but in the family meeting, having these discussions. But the activities of a family meeting typically include learning about the enterprise, learning about what the family is doing through presentations. And those presentations, can be things about projects that the family has developed or projects that the family sees they want to accomplish. In the first couple of initial family meetings, it's, usually more about the process of family governance and things that need to happen. Discussing the direction of things and being educated about that. Again, the education part is really important because you may have young members of the family who've never talked to a CPA, they've never talked to a lawyer, they've never talked to a financial advisor. And now, because they're going to be part of this bigger thing, this family meeting and this family governance, they need to start learning those things. So it's not uncommon at all. And I think it's a great idea for people to bring outside advisors into these meetings and let them talk about what they do to start building the base of knowledge that the younger members have, but also just to show that their input is important and they've got a seat at the table. So I think that's really important. And then just from the time together, you end up reinforcing your values, there's a culture that starts to develop, and you get a lot of communication. Part of the family meeting is set up so that every family or branch of the family or whatever the family decides, gets a chance to say what's going on in our lives. What are we doing? What are our kids up to? Philanthropic activities is a really important thing for people to talk about. Not because everybody needs to do philanthropy, but because it's one of those key ways that these things play out in life. When you've got a family foundation or a donor advised fund where you're creating a structure, on how to make distributions, you can mimic that. You can use all of these things with the donor advised fund, not just a family foundation. So family meetings are really important. They're really crucial. You've got to plan them and do them. You can't do it once and then say, well, in 5 years we'll get together again. It's got to really start to get some energy and some attention. Oh,
hey, Mark.
Yeah.
Before we turn away from family meetings, we've actually got a question.
Okay.
Which is, when you have family meetings, do you provide agreements or waivers to the non-clients?
Not always, but sometimes. I have done it where we're going to be discussing family businesses, and there are things that are maybe not proprietary, but they're at least very confidential. So you can do it. I don't think there's a magic yes or a no, but I think you've got to think about the facts of the family and the circumstances of the family and protect what needs to be protected.
I would agree with that. I would say also that it's not uncommon when facilitating these family meetings, it becomes the confidentiality of it becomes one of the core, the rules of the road that get established at the beginning of the meeting. We all agree that what happens in this meeting stays in the meeting. For those of you who are familiar with YPO, there's the concept of the parking lot. And I know, and it's also something that's come up in the training that Mark and I have had to facilitate these meetings too, which is really an agreement of, hey, there may be things that come out of this meeting that are really important, and we want to acknowledge that, and we want to make sure that we address them, but this may not be the appropriate forum to address this issue. So we're all going to agree that we're going to keep a running list of things that we're going to put to the side that we'll summarize and we'll come back to later, just so that we can keep the communication going and focus on the agenda that we've all agreed to coming into this meeting. So I've seen it be part of that too.
That communication part, I think, is crucial because
Yeah.
once the meeting's over, there are follow-up items. There are things that need to be dealt with. There are new ideas that need to be explored, and continuing that process, even between the family meetings, is really, really important.
Yes.
Okay, so let's see. Oops. Next, no. All right, here's an Andy.
Here's Andy, another bad one, woo, followed by a good one. Okay, so in this example, we had a client where dad had had a significant liquidity event. He decided to fund a large foundation. He is somewhat philanthropic, but really and truly, he was looking for that charitable deduction in the year of the sale. During his lifetime, dad was the sole director and officer. Following his death, though, he named his 3 children as the directors and officers. The kids were not aware the foundation existed at the time. They only found out about it after he passed away. And that's when they also, not only, hey, there's this foundation, and by the way, you're all named as the successor directors. This was a really unfortunate one, where because dad hadn't involved the kids, but also there just was not really a lot of planning around what he intended for this foundation to accomplish. There was no mission statement, which would have been really helpful to the kids. Even more so, though, would have been involving the kids at the time of, hey, I have this foundation. I would like the 3 of you to be involved in it at a certain point. This is what I want it to achieve, or, these are my goals. There's also, in this one, there was a demonstrated history of dad not getting along with the kids and the kids not getting along with each other. And so I can't say for sure because we weren't involved with the formation of the foundation. We didn't get involved until after dad passed away and the kids came to us to try to figure out what to do. My theory is that dad was trying to create that kumbaya moment in death that he was not able to achieve in life. And by naming the 3 of them as the directors of the foundation that they would have to run together, it would force them to get along better and work together. Unfortunately, that was not successful. The kids tried for a while, but it was difficult because there was no mission statement and there wasn't really a pattern in the grants prior to his death. His giving was all over the place. So they were unable to kind of discern from that what was important to dad and what kind of legacy would he wanted to have had. And so ultimately what they decided to do was split this foundation into 3 parts, but they had really fought that because they all recognized that if they could work together, having a pool of $25 million, which is the initial funding, would have supported a lot more things, or, they could have been more impactful in certain projects than having smaller foundations. So that, but they really had such divergent views on how the assets should be managed, where grants should go, what the process of determining the grants, the causes that they wanted to support. It was all so over the place that really it was the best choice out of a lot of yucky ones, was subdividing the foundation. So it's really an example of another one where having the planning ahead of time and the communication at the head of the time and creating a structure for healthy communication would have gone a long way toward reducing the conflict that ensued. So that was a tough one. But on the flip side, I finally have a good one. And the next one, which is a family that I've worked with, one of my favorite families, where G1 had established a successful family business. G2 had carried on the tradition and then added a form of family foundation. There was a G3 that at the time we got involved was running the business, and it consisted of 4 siblings. And G3 was ready to step back and give the reins to G4. And so what they decided to do is they named one child from each family branch or from the sibling pool. So four kids of G4 were to serve on the board of the directors of the business. G4, though, already had a significant ownership interest in the trust, in the business through trust, because they had done a lot of complex estate planning. And so the kids were already owners in a sense because they were beneficiaries of the trust, but now G3 wanted G4 to actually take the reins. And so they were able to successfully navigate this by several ways. One, they have family meetings every year that are very structured, and they're usually about 2.5 days. And one day is dedicated to the business, and a day or so is dedicated to the foundation. And then a half a day is dedicated towards more content. G4 runs these family meetings. So they have to work together to schedule them and develop the agenda. They pick the location, so they pick a different location every year. And then they bring in speakers of things that are of interest. So we've done presentations for them about, investing 101. What is stock? What is a bond? What does this mean in a portfolio? What about retirement? All those kinds of things. A lot about charitable planning as well, and best practices for a foundation. So that's how they use their time. Interestingly enough, Mark, you've talked about, whether spouses get involved in these meetings. And the way that this family does it is the spouses are not involved in the business at all, but spouses can be and are encouraged to be involved in the family foundation. And so they're usually part of day 2 and then the educational component. But they've been very thoughtful about that. And I think they've done a lovely job of saying, look, we value you. We want you to be, you are a part of the family, and we want to honor that. And we want to involve you in the overall family enterprise, but the family business is the family business, and that's over here. Mark, why don't we go to the next slide? Because another thing that this family has done in doing this was really thoughtful about understanding family business systems. And this is a point that I made earlier in the presentation about how, especially when you're dealing with a business, you can have different contingencies, and that you have to be mindful of, because all of their interests may be aligned, but they're not necessarily all the same. And the more you can incorporate all of those different interests in the family, the structure, in the governance, it's likely the more successful, especially through transitions, this business is going to be. And so this is just a Venn kind of diagram of the intersections. But if you look at 3 circles in a business of ownership, family, and then the business, and how things interact or not, you see that you've actually got 7 distinct groups here. And so if you're not being mindful of those different cohorts and how they all play into how the business operates, you may be missing areas where, and not fleshing out areas that need to be fleshed out in terms of how decisions are going to be made and how things are going to be communicated. So this family was very thoughtful about that. The other thing that this family has done, and if we go to the next slide, beyond the family meetings, is this family actually has a family constitution. And a family constitution is, we've got the mission statement, that's a couple of statements, a couple of sentences that define, the family's North Star. This is what we're working towards, so it's the big picture. The family constitution is a longer document, often includes the mission statement. In fact, I think the good ones often do. But it actually goes more into the nitty gritty about how we're going to create intentional communication. So it talks about the culture, values, and communications, decision-making, the roles and responsibilities of different family members, futures, legacy. It can also address things like how, spouses and future spouses. I've seen family constitutions say, for example, that it is the expectation of the family that prior to getting married, every family member will have a prenuptial agreement drawn up that that says that the family business remains, and this family member's interest in it, yes, will remain their own. So that's an example. And so it's another one where it should be written flexibly. It needs to be detailed enough that it outlines the goals and the roles and responsibilities, but it also needs to be flexible enough that it can change over time. And it's likely it will be updated over time. One thing to bear in mind about a family constitution is that it's non-legally binding. So then you may say, well, okay, if it's not legally binding, then are people going to follow it? And the answer I've seen with families, yes, this goes back into the ownership and the buy-in. If the family as a whole is involved in the creation of this document, you're more likely to follow and adhere to something that you participated in creating. And it looks like we have.
So we have a question, and then I think maybe, Andy, we should jump to family councils.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah, so let's see the question. What are your thoughts about using a tiebreaker trust protector to break deadlocks? Who can that person be?
I would have done back handsprings for my trust case if there had been somebody as a tiebreaker trustee. So I think that's a good practice, and or a provision that I've also seen it where if you've got co-trustees in the event of a dispute, one trustee's prevails. So I've often seen that and Mark, I'm sure you've seen this too, where like if a kid is old enough to be a trustee, they're now age 40 and we're making them co-trustee with Aunt Sally. If there's a dispute, Aunt Sally gets to control, but there is something to break the deadlock short of court intervention would have been amazing in that case.
Let's just jump to our last topic, because I know we're at time, but we told you we were going to talk about family councils, and we can do that quickly. So watch out, some spinning slides go by. You can see there's other stuff for you to read outside of here, and get in touch with us if you have questions. The idea of a family council is that somebody's got to run the family meetings, right? Somebody's got to watch the family constitution and help put it together, and then help not really enforce it, but to watch it and make sure that people aren't straying. Because if you find something that you've agreed to and people are straying a lot from it, it means you probably need to renegotiate it or rework it so that you've got something people can live with. My one example that I'll give really fast is I recently, well, it's a while ago anyway, met with a beneficiary who came in, and he was a part of one of these very large families, and he brought me his family foundation's documents, and it said, we will never support any sort of LGBTQ type of programs. And he said, this is a real problem for me because I'm gay. What do I do? Now, luckily, they had a family council. There was a structure in place where some members of different parts of the family, were sort of the big governing board. And he engaged in a conversation with them and said, I know this was written a long time ago. It's really, it's problematic for me. How do we keep our governance structures, our foundation, our things up with the times so that they remain meaningful to the people who are involved and responsive to the people who are involved? And so the family council was the perfect place, because that's the one where, the broad group of people looks at what are our policies, what are our boundaries. In the Constitution, when we talked about, maybe we set up ways that we would deal with each other. And again, conflict resolution, it really sort of flows up to this family council. Now, not every family is going to need that. That's a pretty complicated type of structure, but there are plenty of them around that do need it and will benefit a lot from having this kind of structure. Since we're already over time, let's just see. Okay, so this, you can read this chart on your own. This is just how do you set up a charter for a family council? What are the things it should cover? Again, note that this is not a legally binding kind of contract. This is just an agreement among the family members about how to regulate themselves and how to make progress with what the family wants to do. So, Andy, is there any other things that you think we should cover before we?
No, I would just, this slide is just a summary of kind of what we talked about before, that, family governance documents are often a mix of the non-legally binding, the Constitution and the charters, but also things like shareholders agreements and, that are. And so making sure that they're all integrated and work together is important. I think the other thing is when it comes to business and business succession and family governance is not forgetting that part of that is making sure that you're bringing the next generation up and having those conversations. And so that's one of the things that the family I talked about did very well and gave themselves a long runway to do it, because it could be that, and having conversations with them about, I think sometimes the, G3 in this example just didn't assume that G4 wanted, or certain members of G4 wanted to take the reins. And so they had conversations with them about, number one, is this of interest of you? We think you'd be very good at it, but at the end of the day, we want this to be something that you want to do. And second, making sure that if that's the case, you have enough runway. If you think somebody would be fantastic, but they don't have the background or the training to ascend to that role, give enough time to allow that to happen. So in that example, they actually, part of the transition, they waited a little bit for one of the G4 kids who was going to be on the board to finish business school. So I think sometimes that we forget about bringing the next generation up is a critical part of the process.
That's the future.
It is.
Yeah. All right. Well, to respect time, I think we better wrap it up. Thank you all for coming and being part of this. You know how to get in touch with Andy, and you can figure out how to get in touch with me. It's probably somewhere in the materials. And we welcome questions, and we appreciate your time.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Okay. Bye-bye.